Title: The Waters That Waited. Year: 166,666,666. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The verdant spiral had once been a sanctuary, a city built into the cliffs above the last freshwater reserve in the known world. It was carved by wind, guarded by vines, and ruled not by law, but by agreement. Until the storms came, until the mines dried, until ambition began to drink faster than rivers could replenish. Now the water was rationed, and survival was a whisper traded in alleyways. The honor-bound still kept the old ways. Armor made of recycled glass, rituals spoken before any drink was poured, and a bow tattooed across his chest. To protect what gives life is to protect all life. People called him a relic, or a fool, which made it fitting when he met the sacred fool. She crashed through the canopy on a glider stitched from stolen mats, giggling as she tumbled into a protest line blocking a corporate pipeline drill. "Did I miss the tea party?" she asked. They tried to arrest her. The honor-bound stepped in. "She's with me," he said. She wasn't, but from that moment she was. Struggle is not punishment, it's purpose in disguise, waiting to be understood. Chapter 2. The fool led with laughter, but her heart carried scars. She had once worked for the extraction syndicates, helping them map aquifers from orbit. One day, she realized the coordinates. She handed over drained an entire village. She stopped laughing for a decade. Now she disrupted instead of designed. She spoke in riddles, broadcasted old poems through hacked towers, and planted seeds with explosive roots. The honor-bound couldn't understand her, but he respected her. They investigated a rumor beneath the city. A spring once guarded by the earliest settlers, sealed when the syndicates came to power. They found it, guarded by drones, marked Legacy Asset, "Do not disturb." So they disturbed it. The sacred fool danced in circles, drawing patterns in the sand with salt from her tears. The honor-bound fought 3 guards with only a wooden staff and patience. The spring gushed. They did not take the water. They let it speak, and it roared. Chapter 3. The spring overflowed, flooding tunnels and drowning dead vaults. Screens went black across the spiral. For a moment, no one knew what to believe. Then people remembered to feel. Children drank freely. The sick bathed and healed, and the honor-bound and the fool stood trial, not in court, in public. The people listened to the fool's irreverence, to the honor-bound's solemnity, to the water itself. The verdict: no sentence, only a sea. The city voted and ancient practice revived. The spiral would become sanctuary again, but this time it would remember. They offered leadership to the honor-bound. He declined. They offered reverence to the fool. She cartwheeled into a pond. Together they built something quieter, stronger, rooted in laughter and law, courage and contradiction. And above the old string, a new message was etched. Struggle is not punishment. It is the ground where purpose finds breath, and water waits for those who remember how to listen. Title: The Echo Garden. Year: 166,346,153.7. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. High atop the cliffs of Embravel, where the wind spoke in old languages and the mountains still remember when they were worshipped, stood the Hall of Stillness. It was not built by hands, but grown woven from somvain and hearthwood, shaped over centuries by monks who believed silence was sacred. But the silence had become brittle. The echo of desire felt it first. A Formosia turned to exile. They wandered the outer realm, searching for the place their voice could belong again. Their visions had once moved kings to tears, but in time, comfort turned to control. When they spoke of pain and contradiction, the court labeled them disruptor and banished them beyond the holy reach. In their exile, they met the echo of the divine. Child of the hall, raised to be silent, taught to suppress yearning. But yearning, like a spring, only waits so long. Together, they returned not to overthrow, but to unearth. Today's liberation, the echo of desire whispered, begins where yesterday's ease became a cage. The hall listened and cracked. Chapter 2. They did not burn the hall. They opened it, first to those who had never been allowed in, song weavers, mourners, dancers of forbidden rhythms. Then to the monks who had grown tired of stillness, but didn't know how to say so. Every new voice was invited not to speak, but to breathe together. The echo of the divine introduced a ritual, the circle of firsts. Each visitor would step forward and say one thing they'd never said aloud. Tears followed, then laughter, then silence, but a different kind. Alive, in the garden at the center of the hall, vines twisted into phrases, not commandments, invitations. The mountain softened, but power does not yield easily, and the elders called for restoration. Chapter 3. The council arrived on storm-backed wings. Silence is strength, they declared. And you've made us weak. The echo of desire stepped forward. No, You've mistaken numbness for peace. The echo of the divine added, strength isn't in silence. It's in safety. As the elders prepared to close the gates forever, the garden intervened. The vines moved not by magic, but memory. They shaped into images. Children once silenced, lovers once forbidden, the faces of those who built the hall and were buried beneath it. The oldest elder fell to his knees. "I remember this one," he said, touching a vine. "She was my sister. She died before she could sing." And then he wept. The gates stayed open. The hall of stillness became the echo garden, and on the stone where exiles once carved their pain, a new truth bloomed. Today's liberation begins, where yesterday's ease became a cage, and every voice, once unsafe, becomes a seed of collective growth. Title: The Comedy of Paths. Year: 166,025,640.4. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They say in the village of Everwhirl, the roads move when you're not looking. It wasn't magic exactly, it was democracy. Every pat in the town was voted on nightly by a community of eccentric engineers, cobblelayers, and philosophers who believed in flexible infrastructure. As a result, commutes changed daily, and getting lost was part of the ritual. The rain singer arrived in a thunderstorm, pulling a broken cart full of umbrellas that sang only in irony. She didn't want to stay. She only needed directions to the Eastern Way. But the keeper of eternal autumn, who ran the lost and found the seasons, told her plainly, "We don't give directions. We give choices." She raised an eyebrow. "All roads lead somewhere." He smiled. "But only a few lead you home." And so began her stay in Everwhirl, a detour she never meant to take, guided not by signs, but the will of the people and the wisdom of the wandering. Chapter 2. Each day the rain singer tried to leave. Each day the road she took circled her back, sometimes literally, sometimes poetically. She joined the path assembly in protest, only to find herself elected co-chair of road deliberations. She argued for consistency. The villagers debated it, in song, riddle, and mime. In time she began to understand. These people didn't avoid order. They believed community was the only map worth following. Every road, every turn was built on laughter, story, and consensus. She met a child who rerouted a path to avoid squashing a beetle nest, an elder who detoured a road so it would pass by his estranged daughter's window, a cat who was given veto power. The rain singer stopped persistent. She started participating. Chapter 3. One morning the new path opened, straight, golden-bricked, unvoted. The Eastern Way. Finally, she whispered. But no one celebrated. It wasn't their path. It had been imposed from the capital, from order, from someone who had never walked the crooked road for joy. The rain singer stood at the entrance, suitcase in hand, then looked back at the council. They were reconfiguring a bench to accommodate 3 arguing poets. She sighed and returned her suitcase to the lost and found. The Eastern Way disappeared by dusk. That night, under a chorus of singing umbrellas, she stood in the square and declared, "All roads lead somewhere, but only a few lead you home. This one we make together." And beneath the ever-turning signpost of Everwhirl, a plaque now reads, "Thrust in the collective. The map changes, but the journey becomes ours." Title: The Soul That Rises. Year: 165,705,128.1. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city, state of Drillick, pain was privatized. Every citizen wore mood-mod implants calibrated to dampen suffering, distract sadness, and redirect anger. It made for quiet streets, efficient labor, and walls that echoed nothing back. But beneath the stillness, the weight built. The lone veteran remembered before the implants, when screams echoed in the bunkers, when grief walked beside you in broad daylight. After the peace accords, he vanished from records but never forgot. His emotions were too raw to contain, so he was quietly reassigned to the city's head caretaker of a memorial no one visited. That's where he met the moth to the flame. She was not a veteran. She was a break-glass case come to life. A therapist turned fugitive after she hacked her own mood mod and began helping others disconnect, feel, and process. She spoke softly, moved like flickering light, and wore a cloak stitched from phrases patients had once whispered in breakthrough. "Why come here?" the veteran asked her. "Because quitting is easy," she replied. "What's priceless is the soul that rises again." And together they built a new kind of memorial, one that spoke. Chapter 2. It started with benches, each etched with a single emotion: rage, loneliness, shame, hope. People sat, they remembered, they cried, they returned. The veteran would offer tea, sometimes stories. The moth would guide them through reflection, not repression. Slowly, Others joined. A painter who had forgotten how to feel color, a mother who had never mourned her child, a council enforcer who removed his mud in front of them and screamed for 45 seconds. No one judged, because finally people were allowed to feel. The council responded predictably. They declared the memorial a contagion zone. The veterans smiled. They're not wrong. Chapter 3. Drones were dispatched. The moth went underground, broadcasting healing sessions through hijacked public terminals. The veteran stayed, his presence a quiet defiance. One day, a child approached him. "Is it okay to cry for someone I never met?" she asked. "Especially then," he said. And together they watered the flower beds with remembrance. When the council arrived to dismantle the memorial, they found themselves met not with rage, but resonance. 1,000 citizens stood in silence, each holding a stone engraved with a feeling. One by one, they placed the stones into the shape of a heart. The council didn't yield, but neither did the people. Eventually, the laws shifted not from pressure, but persistence. Mood mods became opt-in. Therapists returned to the public square, and in the city's heart, the memorial grew into a garden. The veteran remained. The moth returned each year for the lighting of the lanterns, and when the bench marked resilience, the words glowed faintly. Quitting is easy. What's priceless is the soul that rises again, especially when it rises for others. Title: The 10th Gate. Year: 165,384,614.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. There were 10 gates into the city of Levan, each said to open a part of the soul. 9 were marble, guarded by doctrine and counsel. The 10th gate, that one was hidden in the ruins, whispered up in songs nobody dared claim as truth. The child of the 10th gate knew them all, worn outside the walls, beneath the shattered arch where were once turned siblings to strangers. She lived quietly, mending broken lanterns and collecting the names no longer spoken in council halls. Her hair carried ash from places no one swept, her eyes the kind that remembered pain without bitterness. Her companion was the one who sings in ruins, a once-renowned bard whose voice had stirred revolts and reconciliations alike. Now silenced by grief and exile, they sang only to stone now, and only when no one listened, until the day a young man collapsed before the 9th gate, clutching a decree denying his mother medical care. The child knelt beside him. "Forgiveness," she whispered, "does not mean forgetting what they've done. It means remembering who we still are. Power is not vengeance. It is forgiveness without forgetting." Chapter 2. Word spread of the Child's Act. The council issued warnings. Unauthorized compassion, poetic sedition, reawakening forbidden gates. Still people came, the sick, the lonely, the weary. The child opened not the marble gates, but the ruined one, its frame still blackened by fire, vines hurling through ancient iron, and through it she led a procession of voices that had never mattered enough to measure. The bards sang again, first in whispers and in thunder, songs of mothers denied medicine, of workers buried beneath quotas, of children raised by law, but not by love. And the city listened, but the 9th gate held firm. So the child gathered 100 hands. Together they pulled vines from the 10th gate. What lay beyond was not another path. It was a circle, a place where every soul could sit, equal, heard. Romance bloomed, not of roses and longing, but of solidarity, love as nourishment, care as revolution. Chapter 3. The council panicked. They accused the child of sedition, the bard of incitement, the people of naivety. But when they sent enforcers to silence the 10th gate, they found their own families seated within. And silence fell. One counselor knelt, then another. The bard sang a song that held no side, and forgiveness bloomed without erasure. The city changed. Healthcare ceased to be a privilege. Names were restored to forgotten gravestones. Council seats were reserved for those who had once been silenced. The 10th gate remained open, never locked, never guarded, and beneath its arch, carved into the stone with soft hands and stubborn hope, power is not vengeance. It is forgiveness without forgetting, and a healthy society is one that never forgets to care. Title: The Ripple Archive. Year: 165,064,102.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. On the Orbital Research Station Veritas 9. Orbiting a pale blue moon in the Aryan drift, silence wasn't just golden, it was policy. Built as a think tank for civilization's brightest, It had slowly become a vault of stagnant brilliance, where ideas went to rest instead of rise. But then came the memory weaver. She wasn't a scientist or philosopher. She was a restoration engineer tasked with maintaining the echo drives devices that stored the emotional impressions of historical events for future empathic simulations. She had a habit of listening too deeply, of asking, why was this feeling recorded, when others only asked how. One day, she uncovered a corrupted thread. A child's whisper vowed to be better than the wars that raised them. It wasn't in any official log, but it resonated, and so she traced it backward, and found the boundless listener. He was long retired, former acoustic cartographer, now teaching at a moon-based preschool. He had encoded thousands of sonic maps, but just one carried the whisper she'd found. Strength that never rests forgets it was meant to rise again, he had once said, mapping the final piece of chord frequencies. Together, they began to ask dangerous questions. Chapter 2. They accessed the Ripple archive and experimental project scrapped decades ago due to unquantifiable impact. They tracked how singular actions echoed forward, not just in data, but in sentiment, influence, and invisible shifts in consciousness. The weaver and the listener rebuilt it, not to trace guilt, to map impact. Kindness offered in a rebellion became a legend to a medic 2 centuries later. A defection in shame became the basis for planetary reconciliation 5 generations on. But also neglect, disdain, cowardice. These rippled too. They made the findings public. Veritas 9 panicked. The council called it reckless, historic revisionism, but the people called it truth. The weaver smiled. You can't erase a ripple, only learn from its wave. Chapter 3. They were ordered to cease. Instead, they broadcast the archive live, laying citizens across the drift trees themselves in time's flow. Families wept together over choices once buried. Veterans discovered the poetry written by those they saved, never knowing they had mattered. And children saw that even the smallest act could spiral into meaning. The council tried to jam the signal, but too many were already listening. The boundless listener was arrested, but as he was escorted off station, people lined the corridors, silent, listening. A memory weaver vanished in a deep orbit. They said she still maps echoes among the stars. The Ripple archive became a public trust, and on a beam beneath Veritas 9 central atrium, where light bends just so, a line is engraved. Strength that never rests, forgets it was meant to rise again, but rising, again and again. That's how we learn to ripple wisely. Title: The Fire in Between. Year: 164,743,580. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the crescent city of Braelen's Hollow, nestled between volcanoes long cooled by sorrow, festival of fire marked the passing of each generation. At its heart danced the flame dancer chosen not for skill, but for sacrifice. This year, the youngest ever chosen was a girl named Near. She was not graceful, she was not brave, but she had once leapt into the river to save a bird no one else saw fall. Her twin, Eno, had always been the natural performer, but he'd vanished last year in the flame procession, swallowed by smoke and rumor. Near didn't seek answers, she sought meaning. The title passed to her with a silent nod from the council. Her only instruction came from an old woman known as the Flame Unfinished, a once legendary dancer whose final performance was cut short by a broken ankle and a broken heart. Sacrifice always returns something, she told Near, but not always in the form you expect. Near bowed and stepped into the firelight. Chapter 2. Her first dance was awkward. The crowd murmured. Children laughed, but Near didn't stop. She turned her stumbles into sways, her hesitation into rhythm. She let her grief shape the movement, let her questions echo in her turns. When she mind lifting a fallen bird and letting it fly again, the silence changed. It listened. That night in her tent, she found a note. He didn't fall. He left to protect the flames from being used as weapons. Eno was alive. Near sought the Flame Unfinished. Together, they uncovered the truth. The council had long used the festival to find the empathic children, then trained them in secret firecraft for military defense. Flame dancers were not merely performers. They were keepers of an ancient, volatile magic. Near wept, then lit a candle with her tears. Chapter 3. She returned to the square. This time, she danced not to honor tradition, but to expose it. Each motion a truth, each flame a name. The crowd felt it. They cried. They shouted. They remembered. The council tried to silence her, but the fire refused. The Flame Unfinished took the stage beside her. So did 3 former dancers long presumed gone. Together they spun a new ritual, one of healing, of naming every child taken, Every lie danced around. The council fell. Braylon's hull changed, not overnight, but with every step, every spark. The air became a mentor, not a martyr, and on the plaque beneath the eternal fire, a single line glows. Sacrifice always returns something, but not always in the form you expect. Sometimes it returns the world, ready to feel again. Title: The Flame Between Breaths. Year: 164,423,076.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Exmoor hummed beneath the surface. Literally. The true city, its bones. Its breath laid under the glittering skyline in a vast network of tunnels and streams, where the forgotten and the fearing found shelter and silence. That was where the one beneath the river lived. They said she never surfaced, that she wore the water like skin, and that her heartbeat kept time with the city's drowned truths. She wasn't a leader. She was a reckoning. Club, in halls of golden hush and political detours, lived the breath stealer, a man of measured tone, tailored grace, and brutal laws passed in whispers. He claimed peace was easier when people learned to breathe less audibly, less freely, less often. In his world, injustice wasn't inflicted, it was designed. That is, until protests began rising like mist from the great choruses of names once erased. Demands scrawled in condensation, courage echoing between bricks. The breath stealer ordered silence. The one beneath the river surfaced, and the city held its breath. Flames grow brighter, not from fuel alone, but from the quiet between breaths. Chapter 2. She did not come to burn buildings. She came to speak. Her voice sounded like flood and memory. She walked through government checkpoints like the tide, slow, unstoppable, and everywhere she passed people paused, because in a world designed for silence, her truth made noise feel sacred again. The breath stealer tried to smear her, declared her a myth, a manipulator, a terrorist of thought. But myths don't organize block parties, distribute food, and help the elderly learn to swim. She did. She stood in the plaza beneath the Ministry of Civility and held up a mirror, not literal, symbolic, a reflective sheet inscribed with names of the missing, the imprisoned, the unheard. No chance, no weapons, just breathe, and the crowd inhaled, exhaled, in unison. The ministry tried to drown them in sound, canceling sirens. The river under the city rose. Chapter 3. The confrontation came without a stage. The breath stealer found her waiting in the abandoned library, where the law once lived, but no longer visited. You think breath will change the world? He sneered. No, she said. The holy has already broken it. She did not fight him. She stood still, and the silence swallowed him. When he tried to speak, no one listened. Not because they were deaf, because they had finally remembered how to hear. In the weeks that followed, Exmoor reconnected its undercity with the upper sprawl. Laws were rewritten aloud, in parks and streets, by consensus and argument alike. The breath stealer vanished. No funeral, no legacy, just a fading echo. The one beneath the river returned below, not in hiding but to keep the currents honest. And on the library's wall, carved by hundreds of hands, a message remained. Flames grow brighter, not from fuel alone, but from the quiet between breaths. Title: The Spiral Threshold. Year: 164,102,563.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Corvin was built in circles 7 rings deep, each more protected and prestigious than the last. At the center stood the Spiral Spire, rumored to house the Spiral Keeper, a figure of myth who guarded the truths too dangerous to surface. No one crossed from the outer rings to the inner without permission, and permission was never granted until the shattered healer broke protocol. Once a physician of the third ring, she'd fallen from grace after speaking publicly about the caste-based healthcare system that condemned outer citizens to decay while inner ones received regrowth serums. Exiled to the 5th ring, she did not disappear. She documented. She stitched wounds and stories alike, and when a plague spread from ring 7 inward, no sanctioned medic dared breach the barrier. So she did. Grasped tighter, and watch what you loved turn slippery. She loved the truth, so she let it escape. Chapter 2. Her arrival in Ring 3 was not welcome. Security drones marked her. Citizens avoided eye contact, but the sick came quietly at night. She treated them with care and calm defiance. Whispers reached the Spiral Keeper. He summoned her. The Spiral Spire opened for the first time in decades. Inside, the Keeper was not a wizard or ruler, but a frail archivist surrounded by layers of forbidden knowledge. I've watched these rings spin tighter, he said, trying to protect what we love until it can't breathe. She laid her bag at his feet. No more grasping. We heal by letting go. He nodded and handed her the spiral key. You'll need this. Chapter 3. With the key, She unlocked the old transit corridors connecting all 7 rings, not for escape, for encounter. For the first time, a farmer from the 7th ring met a poet from the 1st. Mistrust flared, but so did curiosity, and in a crisis, courage becomes contagious. She guided dialogues beneath the old aqueducts, turned plague centers into learning hubs, and dismantled the caste clinic structures brick by infected brick. The council tried to silence her again, but the keeper stood with her. So did hundreds. Eventually, the rings dissolved, not physically, but mentally. No checkpoints, just common ground. On the spiral spire's entrance, Nell turned a shared atrium. The phrases etched, rasped tighter. And watch what you love turn slippery. But open your hand, and you might just hold the world. Title: The Thread of Time. Year: 163,782,051.2. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Citadel of Equinox was a marvel of architecture and arrogance, balanced precisely at the equator. It was built to face every direction equally, a symbolic monument to neutrality in a world increasingly divided. But beneath its marble symmetry, choices tilted toward power, and voices that didn't fit the shape of consensus were quietly uninvited. Into the silence walked the Time Bender. He was not what they expected, a soft-eyed man in a withered cloak, who rarely spoke above a whisper. His gift was not just time travel, but temporal empathy. He could walk the timeline of someone's life, not to judge, but to understand. The council viewed him as dangerous. The threat spiller, however, saw him as necessary. She was a rogue curator of hidden truths, weaving neglected voices into vivid tapestries. Her gallery, the spilled thread, was forbidden art, an unspoken history stitched in silk. She asked him once, "What does time teach?" He answered that every silence has a story, and healed silence doesn't hide. It becomes a war cry wrapped in stillness. Together, they planned a revolution of perspective. After 2, the Time Bender walked through memory. He entered people like libraries, not to rewrite, but to read. The war general wept as he relived the moment he chose ambition over his brother's plea. A diplomat paused mid-negotiation, overwhelmed by the laughter of a friend he betrayed. The thread spiller followed, gathering fragments color, regret, triumph, sorrow, and stitched them into walls, cloaks, flags, not of nations, of nuance. The citadel cracked, not from riots, but from reflection. People saw themselves in others, not perfectly, but enough to pause, enough to wonder. Council leaders called it dangerous destabilization. The citizens called it clarity. When asked what they wanted, the Time Bender said, "A society that listens across timelines." Chapter 3. The climax came during the Eclipse Forum, a ceremonial gathering meant to reinforce collective ideals. The thread spiller unrolled a tapestry across the floor. It held every perspective stitched in equal thread count. Oppressors, victims, witnesses, cowards, heroes, the honest and the hidden. The Time Bender stood at its center. "This is not an indictment," he said. "It's an invitation." One counselor spat. "You'll tear us apart." "No," he replied. "We've already done that. Now we mend." A child stepped forward and touched a face in the tapestry, her grandmother's. "She never told me her pain." "She didn't have to," said the thread spiller. "Now you know." The vote that day was unanimous. The Citadel would no longer pursue balance through erasure. It would honor truth through inclusion. The Time Bender disappeared soon after, some say into the future, others into a story still being written. The thread spiller remained, and on the Citadel's eastern wall this was engraved: "Healed silence doesn't hide. It becomes a war cry wrapped in stillness, and every thread adds strength to the weave." Title: The Echo of Command. Here, 163,461,537.9. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Spacefaring Citadel. Ovaria hung over a collapsed star, its orbit delicate, its systems old. Once the pride of the Unity Fleet, now it drifted still functional, but led by a council whose ethics were algorithms, and whose laws favored logic over lives. At its heart sat a locked room, the chamber of command. Within, the relic called the clock, with no face, ticked a device that tracked not hours, but moments of moral clarity. They had been silent for a generation. Then came a signal. 3 simultaneous emergencies across the station. Oxygen leak on Deck 12. Reactor surge in the cradle core, and a prison riot in Sector Blue. The current council hesitated, waiting for consensus. But the honor-bound did not. She was not high-ranking, a junior systems analyst known for quoting old philosophers, asking inconvenient questions. Yet she acted, divided her team, trusted local decision-makers, and in doing so, saved hundreds. We lose our grip on control to find our grip on grace, and for the first time in 40 years the clock with no face began to hum. Chapter 2. The council reprimanded her, called her response reckless, but survivors called her something else. Soon, her story spread beyond the citadel. A loose network of decentralized ethicals began to form crew members across Irelia, who chose integrity over inertia. They wore no badge, but their symbol was a hand open beneath stars. Meanwhile, the clock's humming grew. It pulsed each time a hard decision was made with empathy. Each time, a by-the-book choice was overridden for the greater good. Each time, someone chose to listen. Instead of command, the honor-bound was summoned to the chamber. There, she met the clock, and the truth. It was not a machine. It was a memory engine linked to the station's founders, who encoded their wisdom into rhythm, not rules. Chapter 3. A cosmic storm approached. The council ordered lockdown. Protect the core. Abandon the outer decks. Let thousands be sacrificed to ensure system survival. The honor-bound refused. She gathered engineers, medics, cleaners, cooks. They rerouted shields, redistributed power, and built passageways where none existed. No one was left behind. When the storm struck, the citadel held, barely, but it held. The clock with no face spun once, and stopped, not broken, fulfilled. Its message glowed across the command chamber. We lose our grip on control, define our grip on grace, and the stars remember what silence dare not speak. The council was disbanded, the station now led by the consensus of care, not perfect, but grounded in voices and values. Title: The Echoing Atlas. Year: 163,141,025.6. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the lantern-lit alleys of Sullivan, where walls bent inward as if to hide their secrets, truth wasn't outlawed, it was misplaced. The city prided itself on harmony, but harmony enforced through hierarchy was a cage draped in velvet. The mapmaker of lost lands knew this well. She lived in a tower made of driftwood and forgotten blueprints, tucked between the scent of ink and longing. Her maps did not chart territory. They revealed places the soul longed to belong, shaped not by borders, but by memory. She drew safe havens that didn't yet exist. Then came the alchemical fool. He arrived on the Feast of Smoke, wearing bells that didn't ring in a robe that changed color depending on who stared too long. He spoke in riddles, danced like uncertainty, and made people laugh until they cried without understanding why. You build where others break, he told her. Let's draw a place no one wants to leave. Her voice was hesitant. That place doesn't exist yet. Exactly, he grinned. You cannot awaken while clinging to the dream that numbs you. She dipped her pen and drew their first shared map. Chapter 2. The cartography wasn't of land, it was of listening. Together, they visited every silent district, neighborhoods muted by fear, by history, by shame. They asked no questions. They simply placed a parchment at each center and waited. People came. Some scribbled nightmares. Others drew symbols only they understood. Some tore the parchment and wept. The map maker stitched each response into a growing patchwork, a new map formed from unspoken truths. The alchemical fool, meanwhile, told stories around bonfires no one lit, drawing laughter from bitterness, alchemy from contradiction. He spoke of a door that would appear when enough voices had been honored, and it did. Chapter 3. The door of many echoes stood in the heart of Sullivan, etched with phrases in every known tongue and a few yet to be learned. One by one, citizens approach, not to enter, to speak. Each confession, memory, wish, regret, it became a soundless chime woven into the city's rhythm. The council tried to halt it, of course. Order must be preserved, but order had never truly included everyone. Not until now, when the council came to shut the door, they found themselves reflected in it, flawed, yes, but heard. Shall we silence ourselves next? One elder asked. No one answered. The map maker added one final line to her chart. This is where we began, listening. The fool vanished soon after, some saying his path appeared on the map just before he disappeared. But the door remained, and Sullivan changed, not perfectly, but persistently. And at the base of the tower where the first blueprint still hangs, a message reads, You cannot awaken while clinging to the dream that numbs you, but you can draw a better one. Together. Title: The Tide That Rises All. Year: 162,820,512.3. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Bellamar rose from the salt flats like a song from silence glimmering, half forgotten, yet stubbornly alive. Its people bore the mark of salt walkers, those who crossed desert brine to trade truth for survival. Among them walked Maria, called the Salt Walker not just for her journeys, but for the way she remembered every footprint she'd ever followed. She was no queen, no priest, no elected official, but when she spoke, even the wind paused. Her constant companion was the whispering constellation, an old device of unknown make, its rotating mirrors set to translate starlight into ancestral memory. It whispered names, moments, regrets. It also told stories of rulers who crushed their people, and others who lifted them. Maria listened, and chose her path, some of life's hardest tests. She murmured one night to a child following her barefoot, look like simple daily choices. Chapter 2. The Lamaras elders fell into quarrel as a rare resource was uncovered: salt glass, clear as water and strong as steel. 3 factions wanted control: the merchants' coil, the temple of flame, eyes, and the ash reapers. Each claimed destiny. None consulted the laborers. Maria asked only, who here will carry the weight? No one answered, so she carried it herself, literally. She hauled sacks of salt glass to the people most in need: healers, builders, teachers. The powerful sneered. You undermine order. She replied, I restore balance. When the reapers set a fire to halt her, the children of the city made a chain of buckets. When the merchants raised prices, artisans forged new trades. When the temple declared her a heretic, the stars above spelled out her name in whispering light. Not by magic, by memory. The device clicked. The constellation turned. Chapter 3. A summit was called to end the conflict. Maria was not invited, so she arrived at dawn, barefoot, with no title, only stories carried by those she'd helped. She did not speak first. She had others speak: a baker, a wounded guard, a deaf grandmother who taught sign to orphans. Each told of what leadership looked like, not as control, but uplift. Then Maria stood and said, I have never ruled, but I have walked, and I have lifted. The hall fell silent. The whispering constellation echoed with starlight, and the elders voted, unanimously. The salt glass would belong to the commons. A new council would be chosen of service, not supremacy. Years later, a carving remains at the city's edge, where salt meets sky. Some of life's hardest tests look like simple daily choices. Lift when others push, and the tide will rise for all.